no good. Rebounded by Anthony. 2 seconds left. Anthony for the win. Got it! Rolls it! Cole Anthony gives the Magic a victory.
Close up Magic.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Close Up Magic. I'm your host, Stephen Cameron. As always, we have the right-hand man, Mr. Malik Grady. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Doing great. Special episode, special night. Special always to be here with you, man. Good stuff.
Yeah, man, we had a really fun episode. For the viewers and the listeners, we had Josh Robbins, ex-Orlando Magic beat writer for The Athletic, who now covers the Washington Wizards, who most of you all know and love as a long-term journalist that covered the Magic for many, many, many years with the Orlando Sentinel, then The Athletic for like his last 5 seasons with the Magic. Before early last season, he transitioned to Washington, where DC, where he's actually from, to cover the Wizards. So really fun episode. I really enjoyed this conversation. Josh always gives such thoughtful and intentional responses to questions, which I really appreciate.
Mm-hmm. It's a real journalist, you know.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. So yeah,
for sure. And this episode is packed. We go almost a full hour with Josh, which is fantastic. So it's going to be a little
generous
bit
with his time. Appreciate that.
Yeah, very much. With all that being said, we'll get right to it. But beforehand, let's gonna do our homework, our housekeeping. This podcast is brought to you by 19 Media Group. Some really exciting things happening with them. Some big announcements to come soon. But the biggest announcement is that our merchandise is live, and you can go to the link that's going to be in the podcast notes. And also it's been on our Twitter. I'll pin it to the top of the page as well. But it's really cool. You can get a t-shirt in multiple different styles. You can get different styles of hats. You can get mugs, all sorts of random things. It's one of those places where, they kind of print on demand. So, we'll see. I have some stuff coming in the mail that I'm really psyched to see. Hopefully you all will enjoy it. The prices, in my opinion, are very reasonable, like anywhere from like $17 to $25 for a hat, t-shirts ranging from $17 to $25, depending on the type of fabric that you want to get and stuff like that. So very, very reasonable in my opinion. I got a hat and a shirt coming, so you'll see me wearing it on the podcast very soon. The last thing, please subscribe to this podcast if you are watching it, or the show if you're watching it on YouTube. It really helps us out a lot. Leave a review if you're on one of the audio platforms. Again, it really helps us out a lot, and it shares it with share it with a friend if you'd like to. Season's coming up. I know some of you guys are kind of checking out a little bit. Some of you are ramping up a little bit, but season's just a few weeks away, and we can't be
12
more excited.
days, I think. 12 days, man.
Super exciting. So I'm very excited. Before we get to the interview, I just want to touch on a note here. Friend of the show, staff writer for The Ringer, senior staff writer for The Ringer, Jonathan Tjarks, passed away over the weekend. And we just want to give a moment to honor him, because he was a really beloved member of the journalist community for basketball, truly a basketball junkie that really loved what he did. He's a young man. I think he was only like 34. I think his son is maybe a little over a year old right now, died of an unfortunate, a really, really like rare and hard cancer to beat, which is unfortunate. There's some really amazing content on The Ringer right now that describes a little bit who he is as a person and the impact he had on so many people's lives. And you can read some of his past work to see his passion and stuff like that. Malik, I know you are very, very fond of his work. So yeah, I don't know. I'm going to just kind of open it up for you for a second.
Yeah, I mean, he was a really interesting man. He had a very distinctive voice, first of all, just the way he spoke on his podcast and all. But obviously a warm guy. And he had a blog where he actually, even before he got sick, talked about balancing his faith with his work, and what it was like to work with people who didn't necessarily believe some of the same things you did, but you really had that connection with them and all that kind of thing. And it just really brought me a lot of value and a lot of, inspiration just as a man. And then just seeing him, the way he dealt with, his illness and what he wanted for his son and for his wife. Just really brilliant. And especially, he was really good at his job. He's really good at, draft stuff and basketball stuff. Talked about Franz, talked about other guys back in the day and stuff. So I'm forever changed just getting to know him just as a journalist and his podcast and stuff like that. I'm sad he's gone, but he left a real mark on a lot of people.
Totally. He came on our show, I think, 2020 during the pandemic, and he came on it the following season as well. Talked about, our draft picks and our young core and stuff like that, and just interesting. I'll just tell a couple quick little things, and then we'll get into the interview. But he was always generous with his time with me. When we would communicate about scheduling, there was always some personal aspects to it too. Like he would ask how my family's doing, check in on, different things that we had talked about. I would ask him how he's doing. He super transparent. Like, we were trying to schedule something this whole summer, right? From a long time ago. Like we've been trying for almost a year to get him on the podcast. And, at first, I'm not feeling well. A few weeks later, he came out and announced that he had cancer, and whatnot, but he never stopped trying to come on the show, which was really cool. We almost made it happen this summer. And then, I had a last minute work thing. So I actually had to cancel it and we were going to reschedule. He literally emailed me 3 weeks ago, asking if we could aim for sometime in September to have him come on the show. And it never mattered how long I had written him an email. He'd always write back to me, write something personal to catch up on something we'd be talking about, ask my opinion about the Magic or something like that, which was always honored when he asked, what do I think about something, which that's cool. Like you're the pro, I'm a fanboy of the team. So I don't know. All that going to say is 34, young, family man, good person. Get your health checked on, people. I immediately, when he found out he had cancer, I went to my doctor, got a checkup, because you never know, man. And tell someone you love them today, because you just don't know what happens tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But no more sad notes. I just did want to give that moment of honor to Jonathan Tjarks and his family and the Ringer staff and all that, who are going through a much harder time than us. But also, the basketball community is struggling right now, with that. So let's get into some happy things. We have Josh Robbins back, a really fun and exciting interview. We cover a wide range of topics with him per usual. So enjoy the show. Let Josh know how much you're missing him covering the Magic, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace. All right, everyone. Like I said in the intro, we got Josh Robbins of The Athletic with here today. Josh, thank you so much. This has been something that we have wanted to do for a while. I think Malik and I have been working on scheduling this with you for a couple of months now, and we finally got a time to get going. It's a great time because season's ramping up, and you've had some time to enjoy your off season a bit, and probably get settled into your new location and all that. But first and foremost, just want to say thanks for joining us. I know Malik and I are excited, and I know the viewers and listeners of the show are also excited. So thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. I am a little humbled because I'm hopeful to live up to expectations. We'll see how I do.
Oh, I'm sure. It's going to be a good time for sure. Malik, I'm going to go ahead and let you kick this one off first. All right, man. You did all the legwork on getting Josh and doing all the scheduling. So why don't you kick off the conversation for us?
Well, I got to say it's pretty fun because when it comes to the ultra nerd, way too into basketball, way into the Magic type thing, Josh is very much a big time celebrity, that kind of thing. So it's just kind of wild to talk that kind of thing. Yeah, it's just weird. But the first question is, I wonder, do you realize, or have you gotten a hint of how much Magic fans miss you covering the team? And kind of as a follow-up, like a lot of people kind of feel the loss of legitimacy that you leaving the Magic beat with the Athletic kind of left us with and all. So I wonder if you get a feel of that, or how does that feel? I know people reach out to you. I've seen online, hey, Josh, good to see you, that kind of stuff. Like, what's your reaction to that kind of stuff?
Oh, it's the greatest feeling in the world, really. Right up there anyway. No, I certainly, as you guys and maybe some listeners and certainly longtime readers know that October when my departure um, all came together really and was offered that job covering the Wizards. That was a pretty super hectic time for me. And most importantly, my dad passed away, which I don't want to get too heavy here. I mean, it's not a tragedy. It's hard to lose him, but he was 87. I don't mean to indicate it was a tragedy. Um, it was a hectic time, and things happened so quickly, and I had to adjust to a new beat so quickly after training camp and the preseason had started that I didn't have much of an opportunity to really absorb it all and study it all. And as difficult as it is to believe, for a variety of reasons, this really hasn't been a typical off season for me. There hasn't been much downtime.
Okay.
So the answer is yes. I feel just tremendous gratitude for the outpouring from Magic fans. I didn't, and people who had read or followed my work. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that people had felt that way. It was almost stunning to me, and it's gratifying, I have to admit, and it means a lot. So thank you for asking about it. And if anyone's, I know people are listening and people are watching me. It means it's meant a lot to me. It's meant a real tremendous amount to me. So thank you.
It's good to hear, man.
There's a saying that a lot of people in Magic Twitter say is like, it's the Magic fam, the Magic family, and you being a part of the Magic family is very much a real thing. And we felt your departure as well because, we're a small market team, don't get a lot of national coverage. You started with us before you were kind of on the national sector segment with like the Athletic with Orlando Sentinel. You've kind of been through the downs with us and ups of us. And I know you're not a fan of the team, but you are a part of the team in many ways. And also we're interactive with people on social media and willing to hop on podcasts and talk with fans and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we felt your impact when you left. And I think we let you know pretty darn well in the comments too, that you'd be posting about, I mean, I know I did a couple of times, I trolled your page a little bit. You'd post about Davis Bertans or something, someone on the Wizards. And I'm like, yeah, but you got any information on Markelle Fultz's return or something like that? I know I wasn't the only one either. So I hope you got a little laugh on that every now and then. My question to you is, okay, so you did a season with the Wizards now, right? Kind of transitioning, not quite at the beginning of the season, but almost. How has the transition been so far, up to today, I guess, a few weeks out of training camp? How has that first year like transition been from Orlando, living in Orlando to finding a new place to live in Washington and covering a new team and getting used to a new building and stuff like that? How has that transition been for you?
Well, there are many layers to the answer. It's a great question, but there are many layers to the answer. The journalism has been the least difficult part of it. The understanding of the team has been the least difficult part of it. Yes, there's a ramp up period, but I think it certainly helped that I had some substantial amount of experience.
Sure.
Covering the league and particularly this division.
Yeah.
That's not to say everything goes smoothly, but in the whole spectrum of everything that goes into this and the aftermath of losing my dad and assuming some more of a responsibility with regard to my mom, right. There's been a lot to process, which I may or may not write about at some point. I mean, I really have not decided whether I will write about that, but I'm thinking about it. So the coverage, it's always a pleasure to cover a team and to have readers. So it's work, but in many ways it doesn't feel like work at all. It's all the other things that have gone into it. And I don't know if anyone has watched me on a podcast before. This is my place in Orlando, and for a variety of reasons, I just have not had the time to focus on clearing this place out. Yeah, I would like to either. Well, I'm not going to go in. Well, yeah, I would either rent it or sell
rent
it
or something like that.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work, man.
Well, it is,
and time.
I just haven't. So I just have not had the time to really tackle it completely. And my goodness, we're 10 months since I signed the contract and took the job. So
sure.
That I think that gives you a sense of just how hectic these 10 months have been. It's been a 10 months like no other I've experienced.
You're not still doing like journalism presidency duties this year as well, are you? Or are you still doing that stuff? I know you at one point you had some hierarchical duties with other journalists. Are you still doing that this year as well, or?
I'm still involved in that.
Oh my gosh,
that's true. That's true. And
so just more on your plate. I got you.
Oh, there's a lot on the plate, but I'm not the only person who's like that.
Yeah, sure.
There are a lot of people with a lot of stuff on their plates.
Yeah.
So I'm not complaining. I asked for this.
Yeah, it's blessed with work. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's true. I was just telling a colleague. Yeah, I was just telling a colleague 3.5 hours ago. I was on the phone with a colleague, and I was telling him, "Hey, it's good that you're busy," and of course he agreed. So I'm thankful.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Oh, for sure. It definitely makes sense. Like when I'm busy at work, my running joke is, hey, it's job security, A quick follow-up to that. Have you had a chance to, kind of explore and have fun reconnecting with Washington?
Yes, I think that it wasn't. It's different to move to a place, even if you grew up in that place.
Sure.
In the middle of a pandemic, and thankfully the pandemic is easing now. So I think things will open up more for me as time passes. So if I had much of a chance to really reconnect with Washington and all the people I know there, not as much as I wanted.
Sure.
For a variety of factors, but I look forward to that.
Awesome.
And I love being up there. I just love being up there. And to get back to Malik's first question, I'm so happy I'm up there, but I'm also so happy that when I look back on the time in Orlando, it's all fond memories, and I miss Orlando. Mm-hmm. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I'm a very lucky person that way. Very fortunate.
Nice, man. Well, that warms my heart to hear, man.
And that ain't no propaganda either. That's really the way I feel.
Yeah.
So, it's I'm lucky.
Well, good stuff. Well, my next question is a little more granular. The 2021 draft was your last one kind of covering the Magic before you left. I know you had assessed Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner going into the draft, all that kind of thing. And I wonder how your perspective on them has maybe changed after seeing them this first year when they went up against Washington, just in general. So I just kind of want to get your view specifically of those two as rookies and now going into their sophomore years, just from your standpoint, from where you came covering them closely going into the draft, but then now having a year, a little screen time to watch them and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll tackle that in the order in which they were drafted. I exited that draft, the 2021 draft, knowing more about Jalen Suggs than Franz Wagner, because I had seen Gonzaga play more, including in the tournament. Saw Suggs's, what was it, 2/5 of the court shot to live. I saw it on TV. That
Oh,
is.
that's awesome.
Right, yeah.
So, but I think it's a real lesson, not to me, but to maybe other journalists and fans out there, is that sometimes expectations change, and they change even after a couple months. So, for example, I entered Summer League expecting a tremendous amount from Jalen Suggs, and not knowing really what to think of Franz Wagner, except for what I had read and what little I had seen. Summer League, Suggs looked really good before he got hurt. Wagner did not, in my opinion.
The kind of pedestrian, honestly, yeah.
Yeah, and right up until that very last preseason game, and I remember it as if it were yesterday, because it almost was yesterday. Wagner looked, he was not impacting the game, but in that final preseason game, something had changed, and he was more aggressive. And the upshot is that Suggs had a disappointing rookie year, and it seems like he's got a lot of skill work to do, which he can do. He's still a very young player. Sure. But Wagner was the polar opposite of what I had seen, or at least perceived in Summer League and at the outset of the preseason. So I think Wagner in particular is a very important foundational piece for Orlando. I'm not saying he's going to become an all-star, but he's going to be one high-quality player for a long time. And the jury's out on Jalen Suggs, with the caveat being that I think he'll be better this year, and I think he'll be better the year after that. So it's a valuable lesson, really, to see that sometimes the way a person plays in Summer League isn't the way he's going to play in his rookie year. And I'm trying to keep that in mind now with Johnny Davis, who had a subpar summer league this past July.
Well, now, did you keep a close eye at the top of the draft this year, or were you kind of more focused on that kind of 7 to 15 range where the Wizards were? Like, I'm kind of wondering where Paolo, Jabari, and Chet were those guys you looked at close, or you just kind of knew enough about them because where the Wizards were.
Well, I didn't think that the Wizards would be able, after the lottery, I didn't think that they would be able to draft any one of those big three.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Did you pay attention much to them in terms of as players, I meant?
Yeah, well, I did. And I was surprised that the Wizards did wind up, that they, not the Wizards, the Magic, that they didn't draft Jabari Smith. That was a surprise to me, but I watched all three players very closely in Summer League, and I think at this moment, I think it appears that Orlando made the right choice.
So far, so good.
Yeah, I had a tweet. Now I sound like a social media
influencer. You're an influencer, Josh.
Right. And about Banchero, and he looks like he belongs. He's got all the confidence in the world. In terms of his size, he's much more of a physical presence than I had expected.
Yeah,
and you can only really sense that when you see a person up close, like with Westbrook.
Sure.
You don't have the sense with Russell Westbrook, the velocity and the power with which he plays until you see him up close.
Yeah.
Banchero, same general principle. And as for Chet Holmgren, it's a real shame.
Yeah,
his injury, but I did enter and he'll probably heal 100% and hopefully never ever have a substantial injury again. But I did wonder whether someone who is that tall, who is that lanky, would encounter any sort of foot, leg, or knee injuries. And look at Jonathan Isaac. So we'll see. But I left Summer League impressed very much with Banchero and also Holmgren.
Yeah. Banchero is my guy from day one. Once I started really following the draft and doing my homework, particularly when I knew we were most likely going to have one of the top picks. So I was extremely excited. I want to just, before we transition to the next question, I just want to circle back to, you were talking about seeing someone in real life and their impact. I feel like I totally agree with that. Not every player's physicality and height and size or athleticism translates from television to viewership very well. The player that, like, I mean, I knew he was a freak athlete, but just his size and strength and bulk was Aaron Gordon. The first time I saw him up close, and I was just like, oh, dude, I mean, I knew you were huge, but no, you're huge. You're a big dude, man. You're a big dude. And that was fun. Cause we drafted Aaron Gordon when I was already lived in California at the time. I was no longer in Orlando. So my first time seeing Aaron Gordon was at a Wizard or a Warriors game.
I got you.
When they had
Nice.
traveled out here, and I was just like, whoa, this is a big dude. It was really, I mean, of course I knew he was big, right? But like, I felt like his size translated differently when I could see him in person. So sorry, Josh, I want to transition to a little bit more, still thinking about your time back in Orlando. Give us one or two of, like, now that you're detached from the team, right? And you can kind of just think about how take this question however you want. What are some of, like, give us two or three of like your favorite moments or memories covering the team. They don't necessarily have to be like a journalistic moment. They can be if you want it to be, like a piece you're really proud of, but or like, it could have been like a fun interaction or something like that. But give us two or three memories that you really enjoy and look back to when it comes to you and your relationship and time with Orlando and the Magic.
Well, that's not a difficult question.
No, and if you only need to pick one or two, that's fine too. No pressure.
Well, I think over a period of time, you really, I really felt, a sense of ownership of that role, where, I felt just an enormous, not a stressful responsibility, but an enormous responsibility to be the best reporter I could be. And I guess I kind of juxtapose that feeling, which I started to feel maybe year 6, year 7, to the very first moment I started covering that team, which was at the very end of their Eastern Conference championship run, and that was even just as a fill-in. I remember I had to write some of the game stories for the rest of the Tribune newspapers at that time, and it was a quick adjustment. I wasn't, it was a tough challenge to just jump in and hit the ground running like that on deadline. NBA basketball is the most difficult of the sports, I think, to cover on immediate deadline. And I've covered them all. And I've covered them all. Every single one of them having to file the first edition story right at the final buzzer or the final out. So that's one. And then, of course, but most importantly, I think just the people I ran into. And I not really, yes, certainly the players, the coaches, the people who work for the team, all that. Those are the memories I have, but also with the fans. And I guess my relationship with the fans really grew when I moved to The Athletic, and I had more freedom to write pieces that really engaged people. So those are a couple of them. And of course, there are a million memories, some of which cross my mind today because I was in an airport today, about all the times where I was on the road and all the challenges, albeit modest challenges that presented. So there are hundreds of them, and I haven't really sorted them all out yet.
I'm sure it's hard to categorize them all and give a stacking order of which ones stick out more or less. I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, you spent years here. So I imagine you're just full of just constant memories. Still remember, I mean, obviously I met you the first time I was covering a Magic game in person in Orlando, but there was like, I don't know, it was like just a couple weeks after that, when the Magic went on the West Coast game, I was at the Kings game. I traveled up to Sacramento for that, and you're walking up the stairs. I'm sitting in the lower bowl. You're like, hey, Mr. Cameron, good to see you. I'm just like, oh, hey, Josh, what a coincidence. Nice to see you as well. That was a fun moment. You just said road trip, and so that was a thought that came into my head. That was fun because we had literally just met in person for the first time a couple of weeks prior.
Was that the old place, the King's old?
No, it was their new arena, because this was 2 months prior to the pandemic starting. This was January of 2020.
Not that long ago.
No, not that long ago at all. Because my first game that I covered in person was December of 2019. So, it was. And then the following, that same season was when I saw you in Sacramento. I love that new arena. The new arena is amazing. So still thinking about journalism and covering a basketball team. You've been now with you've been with two teams covering in the NBA now. So
I assumed she was up there. So okay. I gotcha. Okay.
So sorry, I'm back.
Welcome back.
You guys hear me? Okay. I'm gonna pick up with that question again, if that's okay. Cool. So, Josh, my question is, you've covered now two basketball teams in the league, the Magic and the Wizards, and they have two different management systems, two different probably like media ways of working around. What are some of the biggest differences between covering the Magic and covering the Wizards that you've had to work around as a journalist, as far as the little nuances that you get, but also just like maybe like communication styles from like the front office down to media that might be different from like a Wizards perspective versus a Magic perspective?
So the Magic perspective is not always constant, or at least it hasn't always been constant. The Otis Smith era was one way, followed by the Rob Hennigan era, and now the Jeff Weltman era. So there are elements within that are that are similar.
Sure.
But there's always a change when there's a different person heading a basketball operations department.
Let's keep it with this current generation then, this current regime.
The Weltham.
Yes.
I will compare it, but it is difficult to compare and contrast it, given that last year was yet another pandemic season.
Sure.
I feel like the season ahead will be more along the lines of what we would consider a normal coverage season.
The new normal, if you will.
Yeah. Now, what the difference is that Washington is a different size market. I think, Stephen, you mentioned that Orlando is a small market. In reality, it isn't. I think it's the 18th largest market in the country.
Okay.
I believe. Better verify that. Now, maybe within the NBA, it's not. It's somewhere in the middle. Washington is a larger market. There are 3 other major league teams there. I'm still wrapping my head around the way it has changed since when I grew up there.
Sure.
And a lot of those changes aren't really the teams, it's the media landscape. Like, for example, in Washington, I'm just surprised at how rarely I see the local TV stations. It's just different.
Gotcha.
Now, here in Orlando, you don't see the local TV much, but you see them more often than you do in Washington. So there are these little differences. And in terms of the way the front offices interact, they're not too much different. I would say that Tommy Shepard came from a PR background. He was actually the head of media relations for the Denver Nuggets for a period of time, and from what I've been told, did a really good job with it. And so he is a little bit more vocal than Jeff Weltman is, or Rob Hennigan was, or in some ways Otis Smith was. So there are little differences, and I feel like I'll have a better sense of how they compare in the season ahead.
Gotcha.
I have a follow up with that, and then I think it's a nice transition to a question that Malik was thinking about asking, specifically when it comes to injuries. The Magic are known, as you know, they don't tell much at all. Never give much of an update. We hardly heard anything about Jonathan Isaac the last year, particularly. They just kind of said he's working on his recovery. Everything was very scripted. And as you know, that could get under some Magic fans' skin a little bit and make us a little bit frustrated. But
They're
also
paranoid.
I get it from their perspective too on why they're quiet. Do you find that Washington is as quiet with that type of information, or are they a little bit more open? Not saying one way is the right way or the other, it's just different. I'm just curious if it's sort of the same experience as far as like communication on kind of updates and things like that with the public versus internally.
So I think that the Wizards are a little bit more open, but with it, however, they have not dealt. Yes, Bradley Beal had a season-ending injury, but that was a very clear-cut injury. He tore a ligament in his non-shooting wrist after some period of evaluation and some testing that Beal himself did. The pathway was very clear. He would have surgery. He would be ready for the next season. The two most interesting injury sagas the Magic have dealt with have been far less
cut and dry.
Cut and dry. Thank you. And clear cut. Yeah, cut and dry. Jonathan Isaac, there are a lot of layers to that.
Sure.
And Markelle Fultz, a lot of layers to what his shoulder situation was.
Yeah,
so they're not quite analogous. I hear where the fans are coming from. I get it. I get where the Magic fans are coming from. And I think part of the backdrop is that this past year, that team was doing its best to put itself in a position to win the top overall pick. And when you do that, it's not necessarily to your best interest to play your best players all the time. Now, it turned out that Jonathan Isaac apparently was not ready to play. He had apparently he had the hamstring procedure late in the season. So I hear where the Magic fans are coming from. And even as a journalist at times, there are elements there that you have to unravel. And it's not always easy because there are understandable reasons why teams don't want to disclose everything. Part of it is a trust issue with the player himself and his agent. Part of it is not disclosing every element of a player's own medical history to the rest of the league. Part of it is not trying to raise expectations and set target dates. And then if, lo and behold, a player can't meet them, as Jonathan Isaac, he didn't play all last year, everyone thinks there's been a setback. So this is coverage of sports and consumption of sports in the 2020s. It's not like it was 10 years ago, and it certainly wasn't like it was 20 years ago. And from a fan's perspective, it's more difficult to stomach. I get it. Yeah.
It was challenging for me because as a diehard Magic fan and someone who's also grown to love the Warriors after living here for almost a decade at this point now, seeing how the Warriors handled communication with the public regarding Klay Thompson's return and even James Wiseman, and like kind of where they're at and how the Magic handled ours. And not one way was better than the other. I'll never say that, but it was a little bit more, I just thought the way that the Warriors were able to give updates without giving timelines and expectations of returns until there was a clear return, like what they did with Klay Thompson towards the end there, they did start giving a little bit of a window. It was just totally different communication styles, while accomplishing similar goals to an extent. So I don't know. I just find it interesting. And so like now that you're working with the Wizards, just like, oh yeah, like, okay, so they're still operating the same way, but it's a little bit different, but still like accomplishing the same goals. It's interesting. It's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. That's cool. Sorry, Malik. I know you had something coming up. I'll let you take over and transition to the next question.
No, it's all good. I basically now, Josh, you're kind of in a unique position to kind of judge the Magic's rebuild with Jacques Vaughn and Rob Hennigan. And then now you have a new coaching staff that played their first year with Washington, with Wes Unseld working with Tommy Shepard. And then you had the changes with Waltman and Hammond, first with Clifford and then Jamal Mosley. I was like kind of thinking like what stands out looking back at kind of these different rebuilds and if whatever you can give in terms of looking at Jamal Mosley. I know that obviously you weren't in the contact that you would have been in other ways and all, but just even from the outside looking in, and comparing it to Unseld and the way things were, like anything that stands out that you're like, is this a red flag or is this something that, oh, I've seen this before, or maybe some benchmarks we should be looking for that you saw or didn't see in some of those other rebuilds and change and regime change, that kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting about that.
Well, speaking only about the Magic, because the Wizards are in a different spot.
Of course.
When I think of the course they're on, so much of it is going to depend on how they, first of all, where they wind up drafting and how well they draft. First, they better be any team that, and there are more teams seemingly than ever going to tank the season ahead. Utah,
Indiana.
Indiana,
Houston,
OKC
San Antonio,
now, yeah. Well, San Antonio, we gave up Dejounte Murray to start over. So much of it depends on where you draft, and then you better draft the right person, the right player. What stands out to me about the past, the Hennigan era, is that they never did wind up with the draft pick that they were hoping for, except for maybe the Victor Oladipo year. And then when they did, they never quite got the right player. They never, I understand why they didn't draft Giannis. Many other teams didn't draft Giannis either. Mm-hmm. But how history would have changed had they drafted otherwise, or if they had drafted, say, years later, Donovan Mitchell as opposed to Jonathan Isaac. When I think about where Jamal Mosley came in, he came in with a very clear mandate. The goal isn't to win now; it's to develop players and frankly, position that team in the for the number one draft pick without impairing these players' development. I think that's in a very, very difficult job to do. In many ways, far more difficult compared to a coach whose mandate it is to win. Because when you lose games and the expectation is not to win, and as a matter of fact, the hope is not to win too much. What is the environment in which these players are learning? Can they truly learn? Can they truly develop when the games really don't matter and the team isn't putting its full effort into trying to win every game? That was one of the areas where the previous rebuild failed and failed badly. Guys like Vucevic, Fournier, Gordon, Mo Harkless, Oladipo, Tobias Harris, I would argue that their development was slowed because they didn't play many games that mattered.
Elfrid Payton.
Yeah, Elfrid Payton. Yes, thank you. So it's as I watched the Magic in person, especially late in the year, I was stunned at how up and how excited that bench was during games. Mm-hmm. I don't really know what to make of it. It was almost like watching a college team in many respects. So yes, their attitudes were great, but it takes more than attitude.
Yeah.
And it takes more than hard work. Will that matter
or not? We don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. It takes more than hard work. It certainly takes more, as important as it is to be in the gym and work on your foul shots or your 3-point shooting or, in the weight room. All that is important, but there's an element there that I think is being lost, or at least is in danger of being lost. And it places Jamal Mosley in a very difficult position. And if he can properly navigate it, it will have been a fantastic coaching job. Mark Dagnall in OKC, similar situation. Steven Silas, Houston, similar situation. Carlisle now in Indiana, to a little bit lesser extent.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Will Hardy now in Utah. So it's tough. It's tough, man. And not all of those coaches will succeed, not through any fault of their own necessarily, but partly because of how the ping pong balls drop or how the front office drafts. So, yes, it's a great thing for the Magic to have won that first overall pick and seemingly have drafted the best, most durable player from that draft. All true. But that's, while probably the most essential part of it, it's not the only essential part of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Question. How do you, I mean, and it sort of leads to, it's very connected to what we're talking about right now. How do you view the Magic going into this season with having, a young budding, like, two-way player with Franz Wagner, who is clearly taking a step with his FIBA play, and we're seeing, looking to do a good leap, a healthy Markelle Fultz, the number 1 pick in Paulo, in my opinion, a top 10, potentially top 8 center, and Wendell Carter Jr. What, we're in the same division now, in the same conference as well. What are your thoughts of the Magic going into the season, and how do you think they're let's say they have league average health issues, right?
Right.
Not the worst in the league by, 2 years in a row. Like, where do you kind of see them finishing in the league if given your view?
Well, I'm a little bit distanced from it now, certainly
Sure.
much more so than if we were to spoken in September of 2021. But I think that their goal will be once again to try to challenge for that top pick. And it's going to be tough to do that given all the other teams that are trying to do the same thing to try to get the top 2 players in this draft, and everyone knows who they are. You need elite level talent to win. For the most part, there are some exceptions, to win big. And this rebuild did get a big shot in the arm to get the number 1 pick, but there's still a long way to go in terms of bringing in that very high level talent that they're going to need. So I would think that the upcoming season will unfold in a way that is somewhat similar to the way it was last year. And yet at the same time, with seemingly more teams trying to tank, it's going to be very difficult to secure that number 1 pick, or at least a chance, one of the top 3 odds for that number 1 pick, without doing some things that are going to frustrate some fans.
They'd have to sit a lot of people, in my opinion.
Yeah,
That's right.
And the things I think
right.
a lot of Magic fans think that it's a little more we're hoping for, but also maybe you'll expect is a little bit of a transition, so that most of the year the team is actually trying to win, but you end up losing anyway just because you're young and you're against better teams. And then down the stretch, you maybe kind of take your foot off the gas a little bit. And if you get to the super high part of the draft, cool. But if you're in that mid lottery, then that's fine too, in terms of where you're rebuilding at and stuff. And to that end, the Magic's kind of over under is at 25.5 wins. A lot of Magic fans are bullish that we're going to go over, but I kind of suspect we're going to go over, maybe not that much farther over than we might have hoped, just because, again, they might kind of fade down the stretch. Does that sound about right to you, or what do you think?
Well, I don't think that they're going to get to 25 wins, because I think that they realize that if they do, their chances of bringing in that other elite player whom they will need are slim to nil. So I wouldn't expect more than 25 wins. That's the pain of a rebuild. And a lot of things have to fall your way, but you control what you can control, and that unfortunately is not doing everything you can to win. Now, whether the Magic wind up taking that path, I cannot say for sure. I no longer cover that team.
Sure.
But I would have to think that that's the path that they are going to go on, because if they end their let's just say their elite player collection attempts at this stage, it won't be enough down the road to have an elite team. They're going to have to go further. They're going to have to get in the Wembyana sweepstakes. They're going to have to get in the Scoot Henderson sweepstakes.
Well, I guess I feel like because the odds have flattened out so much, and because this is a little bit deeper draft, if you're in that 4 to 10 range, you can still be in that 25 to 35 win range, or even 32 win range, and still be within there. And your odds aren't that much lower than those top 3 guys. I don't think they're going to be able to get that top 3. I think that San Antonio, I think Houston, I think OKC, they're going to lock that up. Those, because they're so injured, they're so thin. Whereas the Magic, if healthy, because Fultz is healthy, you have other guys that are coming back. They can't match the sheer tankitude of some of these teams and all. But it's going to be fun to watch, I think. So,
well, it's going to be tricky for them.
Yeah,
it's going to be tricky for them. It's an enormously difficult line to straddle. And last year they did it, obviously, very well.
Had some help with some long injuries too with Fultz
and COVID. There were a lot of things that contributed to that. I think that won't happen this year, but it's interesting.
Yeah, all true.
Did you have another question? I have another question. If you didn't have one, Steve.
Go ahead, Malik, okay. You got it.
Let's see. What did I say? Sorry. Okay. Now, one thing that's interesting, because Stephen and I are basically lifelong fans of the Magic, and we would try our best to be objective. We're still kind of fans covering the team.
Bias all over the place.
Exactly. But we try to at least put on a veneer of a balance, so to speak. You're not covering a team that you watch growing up. There's a kind of emotional connection with your family. Your journalistic fortitude is impeccable. The way you separate those two in terms of fandom and the way you want to be professional, and as a mentor to other journalists, I have no doubt that you don't have any issues with that. But I wonder, has it been any different than you expected covering a team that you had those memories of as a youth, even with, I don't know, maybe some of your buddies around town or all that kind of stuff? And I just kind of wonder, has it been any different? And do you have any advice or observations to people like us who are in this kind of fan media hybrid position? I don't know. It was a thought that came to mind.
I'll tackle the fan hybrid position first. I think if you're, I put it like this: if you're a journalist, you better behave like a journalist all the time.
Gotcha.
Or you're not serving your news outlet well. I'm referring to people here for whom journalism is their first and only profession.
Absolutely.
And I think people who are fans need to be upfront with that, and be straightforward with the audience as to what their point of view is. If that's the case, I don't see anything wrong with it. Where I have issues, and this is more about an industry type of thing, I think that with what a lot of teams do with team employees who purportedly, I'm tempted to do the air quotes, and cover a team, that's not coverage. Now, it may be journalistic in the sense that you're writing articles, you're asking questions at the press conference, but that ain't that's not journalism. It's not journalism when you're paid by the team itself, and then you're covering that. That's just not what it is. I went on a tangent here, and I'm not entirely answering your questions.
Yeah, but it's interesting though.
But I would say that one of the problems that all professional sports leagues are facing is this blurring of lines. I'm not suggesting that people who are fans of a team cannot write a blog or produce a podcast. I think it's great. I'm having a great time with this, for example, and I have the highest respect for you guys' knowledge and your passion for things. But where these leagues have gone wrong is purposely blurring the lines. expecting journalists to not give, to actually blur the lines. It was a mistake. And now these leagues are paying for these mistakes. And is it too late? And I'm not referring to the two of you or any fan podcast. Is it too late to put the genie back in the bottle? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, obviously there are some problems with that. However, some of the writing you get from the embedded reporters or whatever you want to call them, I know there's a distinction, reporter, journalist, and all. But obviously, like some of the work that Josh Cohen is able to do as being part of the team, there's certain access he gets and things he writes that are very valuable, not only to fans, but I would assume other reporters who are able to go to the website and talk to Josh and get some of that insight. Now, it's not straight journalism where you're like, hey, I don't have my finger on the scale, I don't have any bias, but if there's someone skilled and knowing how to balance it in a certain way, there's value there. I mean, like, don't you still get some value even as yourself being able to talk to somebody like a Josh Cohen or even read his stuff, or is the blurring just a real problem for you to the point where you're like, well, I need to stay away from it? I just wonder.
No, I don't view it as that kind of a choice. Look, Josh Cohen is a good friend of mine, and I have the high. Look, he understands basketball, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he has a feel for the game that, not many people have who don't play the game.
Exactly.
There's no question about that. But as much as I love Josh, as much as I respect Josh, Josh isn't a journalist and he's not a reporter. He's employed by that team. He's an extension of that PR arm, which, as sometimes people say, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But what it isn't is journalism. It's not. Right. Who edits his pieces? Team employees edit his pieces, which, again, nothing wrong with being a team employee. But what it is, it's not journalism. It's PR. And I see where teams are coming from. In Orlando, for example, we're talking about Orlando, so I'll use them as the example. The media landscape is not as robust with the number of journalists that there used to be. I understand why the team wants to produce its own content they're doing it to draw people into their website in order to generate revenue, in order to sell tickets, in order to sell.
And most teams do that now. I mean, like the Clippers hired that great journalist from SI who's now with it in-house. I don't even write anything anymore. I forget his name now, but yeah.
Well, Lee Jenkins is one of the all-time great writers and journalists, period. I mean, one of the all-time great feature writers, period. Yeah. Now, but what he's doing is actually front office work. It's not, he's actually involved.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Gotcha. So he's not, and look, we can go down the line to all the people who had been in journalism, whose careers had been saved and prolonged in their ability to support their families by these team websites. I wouldn't say that they can't do that. I mean, we could list there's probably not a team in the league. Even Sam Smith, the former PBWA president who wrote the Jordan Rules, one of the most groundbreaking NBA books about the NBA in the history of the league. He's a team employee now for the Chicago Bulls, and it has been for some time. That's not to say that these people are not talented or gifted, or that much of their content has value. Of course, it has value.
It's a different style of totally different job to an extent.
Well, and right. I think that we kind of, I mean, I know that myself, I kind of embrace reading and listening to people who kind of blur those lines after having listened to so many years with Bill Simmons and guys who have that kind of fans perspective, but also are talking to players, are talking to front office people. So there is that blurring of the lines, and you can get a certain value from it. You're right. It's not journalism without some adulteration. That's for sure. But having that value and all. So it's interesting. I always love hearing your perspective because you are so sacrosanct in circumspect in some of the lines that you want to make sure are done. And it's important because you are mentoring other journalists that you're bringing up in this world. So it's important that you have that fire, I think.
Well, I do, and I think a lot of people in my industry do. And I wouldn't be fair or accurate if I just left it at that.
Mhm.
So there are people who are journalists, or at least used to be journalists, who no longer behave like journalists.
Gotcha.
Two of the most talented people who've ever done the job are Michael Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser.
Mhm.
Period. I mean, that talented,
Oh,
that
yeah.
good. Kornheiser was one of the great takeout writers before he became a columnist. Mike Wilbon, one of the great reporters before he became a great columnist.
Sally Jenkins and all of them, yeah.
Well, Sally Jenkins is not. Well, Sally Jenkins is great also, but she's not the person I'm going to. I'm talking about Wilbon and Kornheiser. I think people like Wilbon and Kornheiser do the journalism field a severe disservice.
Okay.
When they, for example, when Kornheiser says he loves Max Scherzer, he loves the Washington Nationals. Now, I applaud him for being upfront about it. And I don't think that he no longer portrays himself as a journalist. Michael Wilbon kind of sort of does portray himself as a journalist, and yet he is more in the bag for the Chicago Cubs, in some cases the Phoenix Suns, than anybody, including those teams' fans. Now he's a trustee at Northwest. I get it. I am faulting them, but what I am concerned about is that the public may perceive them that they are still journalists. And what they are doing is journalistic, but they're no longer journalists. And that's problematic for the profession, I think, and just as it is, you see Skip Bayless, Stephen A. Smith, the
Different personalities.
Well, they're of course a much more extreme hot take example. That's not good for the industry either. Okay, they're more showmen now than even commentator, although they do comment.
Mm-hmm.
These are lamentable developments for the industry, where the issue is not what their reputations. I think they're still certainly in Wilbon and Kornheiser's case, they're still very well respected as intellects, etc. They break things down as well as anyone. But where it really worries me is, that teenager who aspires to become a sports journalist, and then maybe he or she will enter the field and believe it is okay that you can be a journalist and have these extreme rooting interests. I don't think you can do the job properly that way. And I think that some of these behaviors, and they are behaviors, seep into some of the working journalists now. And this is, social media has many great aspects to it. Connects people. I think it's connected the three of us, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And many more, right? But there's always the temptation to go for more retweets. There's always the temptation to go for likes. Sure. And to do that, sometimes you might have a hot take, or you might have a joke. Well, as I've said many times in many other forums, be careful about the lines you blur as a journalist. Gotcha. There are many ways to blur those lines. That's one of them. And I don't think it's beneficial for the industry, and really for the profession, I would say. These are, maybe I ought to be worrying about other things. Maybe I ought to be worrying about inflation or other serious problems. But these are the things that I and many others within the industry worry about.
Well, I got a follow up here. When and I know we're coming up to time. I'm gonna let Malik wrap us up with his final question after this. But my follow up thought is, Josh, can you please knock on your boss's door and tell him to hurry up and hire someone to cover the Magic again? We need some athletic coverage. We're dying to get it. We're missing. I'll say this. We lost. We lost Roy with the Sentinel, and then we lost you, and then Kobe Price eventually took over and for the Magic beat writer for the Sentinel, and he's done a phenomenal job filling in. but it doesn't mean we still don't miss the energy, the professionalism, and the quality of content that we as subscribers to The Athletic would get with you. So hurry up, tell your boss to get someone in here real quick, because if not, we're gonna keep yelling and screaming at The Athletic's door until we get somebody. All right.
And we know Josh throws a lot of weight around there. He's carries a lot of power, broad shoulders in those rooms.
Help us out, Josh.
Well, I may have a lot of physical weight in terms of poundage. I don't know how much weight I have to throw around. This is a observation that I do hear a lot of.
Sure.
In part because I covered that team for 13 consecutive years. Not all, the first 9 maybe with the Sentinel. I get where people are coming from. I hear them. I don't want people to think that the only team in the NBA that does not have a dedicated beat writer is the Magic.
Oh no, we're not.
That's not the case. But I hear where you're coming from, and I believe in the First Amendment, and which gives all of us the right to express our opinions, and I welcome your opinions.
We need to share a writer with somebody. If, let's say, Charlotte doesn't have a writer, we hire one writer. They cover both teams. It's a little bit different, but at least we get something once a month or twice a month. I don't know. I'm just pulling your leg.
No, it's not, and I'm glad you can say these things to me. That's that's part of it's part of what I'm here for.
Yes, sir.
Part of what I'm here for.
Malik, I'll let you wrap it up with your question and take us home.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, sir. Sure.
Malik, I didn't answer one of your questions. You asked me, what's it like to cover a team that in your youth you were rooting for? I'm coming off holier than now, as I did over the last 20 minutes or 10 minutes that we've spoken. It's not difficult. It's not difficult at all, and part of that.
I just wondered if it was different than you thought it would be. I don't think it's difficult for you. You have your lines and you're not crossing them. I just wondered if it was different for you being like, back in Galilee, so to speak, that kind of stuff.
Well, it happens at least every couple of games in Washington. So that's not the arena where I grew up watching the old Washington Bullets. That was the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland. But when I am in that building, and now that I cover the Wizards, I look up into those rafters and I see the same. Maybe they're not the same exact pieces of cloth, but they're the same design. They're the same. They look the same.
The boule.
They're the Elvin Hayes, the Wes Unseld, Gus Johnson, retired numbers, and then they're the Capitals retired numbers. All the guys I rooted for as a kid. And I do say, I never even dared to dream to become a reporter when I was a kid. Never thought that was achievable, or, I thought I would do something else. But I do look in the rafters and say to myself, wow, I sure am lucky I'm doing this. I was some kid who had an interest in sport. I have a huge interest in sports, like hundreds of millions of other kids over the last 120 years in this country, and also around the world. And then as I got older and I was in college, I became as much of a fan of journalism as I was of sports. And I'm so fortunate to have this job, and yes, the feelings do hit home sometimes when I look in that ceiling, or when I drive to a game, down these same streets. The route I take to the arena there, strangely enough, we used to live. I was born in the city. I grew up most of my youth right outside the city. This is the same route I used to take. 2 times when I was a kid, I had to have teeth pulled for whatever reason. This is the same route that my parents would take me on the way to the surgeon's office. So there are 100 different things. I think it's a special experience, and but now I interrupted you for you were about to ask me something entirely different, but I felt like I owed you an answer.
Well, honestly, I think that's kind of a good place to wrap it up. Mostly, I do want to say that I do appreciate you being a paladin for journalism and journalistic integrity. I share a real love for journalism myself. You know, having graduated from UF College of Journalism, and you know, just being a fan of different journalists in general and stuff. I don't feel the same about some of the things you feel about, but I do feel passionate about wanting the profession to survive and to be respected, and still have, you know, bright uh moral people being part of it and stuff. So I think you're definitely a champion in that way. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about Kobe Price is that he's very much wants to be a mentor for other young people and other young Black journalists and that kind of stuff. And it's just really exhilarating to be people who have that fire within them. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on. I hope we get to have you on again. And you know, it's been a real pleasure for us, I would say.
Well, for me too. For me too.
And,
Really
and
is.
And Josh, yeah, I mean, we haven't had a chance to talk as much since you don't cover the Magic anymore, but it was nice to have you on the show tonight, catch up with you a little bit beforehand, and please don't forget about us Magic fans. Every now and then, you know, just drop in the comments. Let us make your Twitter blow up by saying, when you say, wow, that Markelle 3-pointer shot was incredible. You know, we'll spread the love.
Well, Magic relevance is coming.
Yes.
I mean, like, we're about to become relevant and then become actual competent, all that kind of stuff up the route. So you're going to end up having to talk to us as we're in postseason and all those kind of things. So we're looking forward to that as well.
Yes, sir. And with that, Magic fans, that wraps up another episode of the Close Up Magic. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Peace. Josh,
Awesome,
thanks so much. That was really
my
great.
pleasure.